Although I am a member of the Church of Satan, I do not speak for the Church of Satan.
Hey boss, how's it going?
Where in the sweet hell have you been? I almost had to embalm Mrs. Johnson myself.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I took a long lunch so I could swing by the post office. I had to grab the mail and check the P.O. box.
I don't know why you even bother. Now that I got my monthly nudie magazines going to my place, there's never anything good, just bills and hate mail.
Yeah, for religions that are supposed to be all about acceptance and love, they sure like to hate folks that are different from them.
Whoa, looks like something that fell off of a homeless mall Santa's sleigh. It's not ticking, is it?
No, it's not ticking.
It seems like a lot of these children of light graduate real fast from Jesus loves you, burn in hell you satanic fuck stationery to Home Depot chemistry. I don't want to have to call the bomb squad again. Smell it. Does it smell like anthrax or dog shit?
You don't pay me enough for that.
Open it up. I've got $20 on glitter bomb.
Okay, fine.
Undertaking Satan presents Grendal's Mailbag. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this installment of Grendal's Mailbag. This week we're diving into the mortuary side of things. We're talking about viewability. What constitutes a person being able to be displayed for a funeral when they're in a deceased state? The specific question comes from Victor, who's a great friend of the show, and he actually reached out on Facebook quite a while back. I'm actually sorry that it's taken me this long to address it on the show. Sometimes that Facebook stuff gets lost in the shuffle. If you want to submit a question, I would suggest going over to the Undertaking Satan Landing Page. That is undertakingsatan.com, and there's a link there to get directly to the email. I'm not going to read Victor's question verbatim. I did respond to him back in the comments. In a nutshell, it was asking how I handle the expectations of what the family thinks they're going to see in the casket versus what the actual product is in the casket, especially in cases where there's a high amount of trauma. First, I'd like to sort of talk about what types of cases this might entail. This could be anything from like a car crash to a workplace accident, home accident. Sometimes it's as simple as when a person passes away, they're standing up, they have a heart attack, and they face plant into the floor. So there's some facial damage and reconstruction that needs to be done. When it comes to younger individuals and individuals who might die under suspicious circumstances, they could order an autopsy, and so then there's fixing that as well. Also, organ donation is another thing. So worst case scenario, let's say that you had a young person, let's say it's a 17-year-old, they were in a auto accident, they were autopsied, and they were also an organ donor. That's going to be a lot of trauma that happens to that body before they can be ready for the funeral. When it comes to legality, and again, I want to stress that I'm not a lawyer. I do have a certain length of rope to hang myself with here because my license in my state here in America requires me to speak on certain matters of this nature. However, this is only one state in the union. Every state, I'm assuming, is a little bit different, and once you get outside of the United States, it's a crapshoot. You're going to need to check with your local municipalities and funeral homes in order to get the correct skinny on this situation. But as I have seen it in the past, viewability ultimately is up to the funeral home. That's how that shakes out. Now, legally, you are not required to use a funeral home. You can say, nope, calling everything off at any point up to the funeral. However, it becomes sort of a standoff if there's a case that a funeral home doesn't feel is viewable. You feel that it is viewable as a family. It probably is going to come to a head with, unfortunately, we're going to have to refer you to another funeral home who can facilitate what you want. If the case is bad enough, no funeral home in their right mind is going to open that up to the public, because we don't want lawsuits, distress, or any of that for anyone being shocked and appalled by what they see inside of the casket. Other ways around this: private family viewings. Generally, there's some leeway there. If it's not open to the public, that kind of helps the funeral home save some liability. But again, that's on a funeral home by funeral home basis. I know the first funeral home that I ever worked for as a licensed person, they had a large preparation room. They had an entire preparation team. There was a manager of that preparation room, and they had the final call on whether a case was viewable or not. If the family wanted to go elsewhere, they certainly could, but yeah, cases were lost because viewability was not possible in the funeral home's estimation. Getting into Victor's question specifically, how do I mediate the expectation versus the reality? I do that by breaking things up into segments. Instead of having one viewing, I'm probably going to have 3. And again, this is only in cases where, there's a lot of trauma and the family doesn't know what to expect. So the first viewing I'm going to have, I'll get embalming permission. I will embalm that person, fixing everything to my ability. That's basically just closing up any wounds, sanitizing the body, going through with the embalming process. If the person's autopsied or if they have underwent organ donation, I'm going to fix those things as well to the best of my ability. And I'm going to get that person as presentable as possible, get their hair washed. For that first viewing, it's possible that the family hasn't even thought about getting clothing for the person yet. So generally speaking, funeral homes will keep some clothing on hand. I like to use just simple things like pajamas, a simple set of matching pajamas from like a Walmart or Kmart, or Kmart's even in business. You know what I mean? Just something very simple, maybe even, a t-shirt and shorts, or a long sleeve and some sweatpants, socks, something of that nature. And I'm going to display them on what's called a state bed, which is not in the casket. Obviously, we don't want to put a person in a casket until we're sure they're going to use that casket and we know that they're not going to come out of that casket again. However, I will put them on a state bed, which is basically just a made-up table or gurney. Some of them are really elaborate and kind of look like old Victorian furniture. And I will show the family the progress that I've made. I do not show lacerations or scars or bruising or anything of that nature. I call this the hospital method. So instead of cosmetically fixing these things at this time, I'm going to use gauze, I'm going to use bandages, I'm going to use band-aids. I'm going to basically kind of have a faux medical state, like how you would see that person presented publicly in a hospice or hospital setting is what I would try to mimic. And the idea of doing that is that I'm not letting the family see the direct trauma, because unfortunately, I hate to say this, but it is possible for families to sue the funeral home if they are presented with something that is seen as grotesque or unprofessional. So, just covering up those things. Sometimes removing a person from a hospital setting, or sometimes loved ones actually discover their deceased people. This is evident in cases of like suicide and things of that nature. But getting rid of all the blood, making sure that they're bathed, making sure that they smell nice, making sure that they're in a nice clean room under nice clean sheets, that sort of thing. That does a lot. I think people underestimate how much setting is a key. And then I will let only the family obviously come in. I'm actually going to start, like if it's a large family, and let's use the scenario as before, where the 17-year-old person passed away. I'm probably going to have mom and dad come in first, because they are the ones who have legal control of disposition. If they insist on the kids coming in, I'm going to try gingerly to say I would prefer that you folks just go in and spend a few minutes, see how they look, and then we'll have the rest of the family come in. So at that point, they have the opportunity, if it's just too bad in their mindset that no one else can see them at that point, we can shut it down at that time. However, if they're okay with the rest of the family coming in, then we do that at that point. So then I suggest next steps. I can say, okay, for example, you can see that I've bandaged her right eye here. That's because something needs to be done in order to restore that. So you can expect to see a lot of cosmetics in that area. Same thing with, an arm, a leg, any of that stuff. So I will show them where the problem areas are, or explain to them, again, not showing them the actual trauma, but indicating to them where the trauma has occurred by pointing to bandages and explaining what's maybe going on, on their chest area. I'm not going to disrobe the deceased either. Okay, that's very important. Legally, if you're doing what's called major restorative work, there's a lot of times extra paperwork that needs to be done, giving the funeral home express permission to do that, or at the very least verbal permission for the funeral home to do that. That's basically anything that's outside of regular embalming practices. If we are having to structurally rebuild things or use large amounts of cosmetics, that would constitute major restorative work. At that point, I'm gonna, say, hey, why don't you get me some clothing? Pick out some clothing that you would like to see them in, and I will get them dressed, and then I will get them cosmetized, so you can see them without the bandages and all of that. So then that's the next viewing. At this point, it's may or may not happen inside of the casket. If I still feel that the person with paramount right of disposition, the person whose legal authority it is to make that call, if I feel like they're on the fence, I probably will not put them in the casket, just because if they wanted to go like a cremation route where a casket's not needed, we're not ready for that at this point. So viewing number 2 then would be the person clothed, their restorative art would be done, the cosmetics would be done. Maybe hair would be done if they had a special hairdresser they wanted to come in, or if they had given us permission to go ahead and do the person's hair. At that point, I would probably let more family come in, aunts, uncles, cousins, that sort of thing. These viewings tend to get bigger as they go on. At that point, we'll get the final yes or no. And then if it's a yes, we'll get them casketed. If it's a burial situation or a cremation situation where the family's decided to use a cremation casket, or any casket really. And then the final first viewing. We're on viewing number 3 really, but this would be the first viewing in a regular case without trauma, where they are in the casket, they are completely ready to go. I would then have them view them in the setting where the service or the visitation is going to take place, just to make sure that everything's copacetic and they don't have any questions. So why do I do it that way? You're like, Grendal, that's a lot of work. And it is. But what you do not want to happen is, let's say in that car crash scenario that I just explained, someone comes in and they see their 17-year-old daughter made up, and maybe they don't understand exactly why the skin tone isn't right, or they don't understand why their eye doesn't look right, or they don't understand why I've used extra clothing to cover up their arms when they didn't request that. It's a lot better for people to tiptoe into that process slowly, and it gives the family more time with the deceased. People can call me a fluid pusher, but I do believe that seeing the body in state is very important for the grieving process. There's a line that I remember from a mortuary textbook that just says there's no replacement for the actual body, because when a person walks in, whether it's a family member or just a friend or acquaintance or whatnot, and they see that person and they say to themselves, within the matter of a second internally, this conversation happens every time. Let's just say the person's name is Bob. You're like, well, that's definitely Bob. Those are Bob's glasses. That looks like Bob. Bob had a mole on his chin. It's still there. That's clearly Bob. However, Bob's clearly dead. And in a way, my job as a mortician is to make people look as good as they can, but fully understanding that my very best work on my very best day is always just still dead. And That's kind of hard from time to time, but it is a very important process. I do want to talk a little bit about hair and makeup. I understand that some folks listening to this, unfortunately, you might have to go into a scenario where you're legally liable for the funeral of your loved one or the disposition of your loved one, and this might become valuable. So I do want to mention one thing, and I mentioned it before, but it has to do with mortuary cosmetics. I'll tell you a brief story just to kind of illustrate the point. Not at this funeral home that I'm working at now, but the funeral home I was working at previously. I got a phone call from a hairdresser for a person who had passed away. I've talked to many hairdressers over my years, and I've never had one go quite like this. It was clear that this person had a bad experience with the funeral home sometime in the past, or they go to a lot of funerals at this place, and they basically told me, you guys are terrible at your job. They never look right. Their cosmetics are always horrible. I am a licensed cosmetologist in the state where we are at. I go to school for this. I do continuing education for this. It's my job to do this and not yours. And I backed her up quickly and said, no, ma'am, that's not a thing. Mortuary license is completely different. It's not the same as a cosmetology license. So you could get a cosmetology license as a mortician, and that's kind of an extra layer of good thing to have. But especially hair is not such a big deal. Hair is hair, right? But the cosmetic side of things is completely different. And I tried to offer for her to come in. I do cosmetics in front of the family all of the time. I actually prefer that, which is something that's very odd. Not a lot of people will do that, but that's where I'm going to with this entire story, is to suggest that if you are able to do so, if you are emotionally able, you can ask to be in on the cosmetizing process and the dressing process, or the hair process. It can be done. Most funeral homes can facilitate it. It won't be in the preparation room or the embalming room. It'll be in another room in the funeral home. Most funeral homes have their cosmetics on a movable cart or in a movable case. And you can be in there when the mortician is doing it. Now, I want to say that's probably up to the mortician. They can refuse any service they want. However, I always say that it's good to ask. Some things that you'll want to note is that the cosmetics process looks a lot different than, let's say, in the morning when you are putting your cosmetics on your face. You're using soft sponges and being very tentative. Mortuary cosmetics are generally applied with brushes, like stiff stippling brushes. It can look kind of forceful, I guess would be the word. It kind of looks like we're pounding into the flesh, and it looks like that would certainly be uncomfortable for a living person. Be aware of that, but you can be in on the process. You can probably even assist with the process a little bit, helping choosing lip color, helping choosing pigment, how much rouge is used, how they did their eyebrows. The reason that mortuary cosmetics are different is because it's more like stage makeup or FX makeup. It is not designed to work with body heat, which most over-the-counter products are designed to work with body heat. And of course, dead people do not have body heat. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question. When it comes to the financial side of things, let's say that you have every intention of having a public viewing, but you're undecided on whether the person's going to be cremated or buried, and you get to that second viewing, or even in worst case scenario, the mortician did not decide to do that. They just decided to do their best and show you the finished product in the casket. I know it sucks to talk about dead people as products, but yeah, you can still say, no, we're going to cremate the person. Even if they put them in the casket, they can take them out of the casket. That casket cannot be resold. You might be liable for that casket. However, it would save you cemetery costs, for opening and closing of the grave and a headstone and everything that's required for the cemetery side of things. So then cremation could be an option there to save money. And that's another reason, like I said, until I'm absolutely 100% sure that a person is viewable, not per my standard, but per the family standard, I'm not going to put them in the casket just because I don't want to charge the family when I don't have to. Another option, obviously, is closed casket. Is there really any psychological validity to having a closed casket? I don't really think so. I think having a closed casket, you could put an empty casket up there and it would have the same effect, right? If you can't see the person, it's my opinion that seeing a box up there is not going to, isn't going to do it justice. You can have photos, you can have, a big giant photo blown up, video slideshows, audio and video of the person. All of this stuff is great and wonderful, but as I said, there's no substitute for that deceased person being there. Well, that does it for this installation of Grendal's Mailbag. That also concludes this episode of the Undertaking Satan podcast. Just a friendly reminder to go over to the Undertaking Satan landing page. That is undertakingsatanpodcast.com. You can get into Grendal's Mailbag over there by clicking on the email button. You can also like and subscribe by going to all of our social media. We are active on X. We are active on Instagram. We are active on Facebook. Also, please take a look at the featured podcasts over there. Right now we have Satan's Plane and we have The Demented One. They are both wonderful. As always, this is your host, Grendal, signing off. We'll see you later. Hail Satan.